Hello, I'm Awesome Tutor, and today we're going to be looking at inheritance. So, let's get started. Now first, let's look at chromosomes and gender. You have 46 chromosomes in each cell, 23 pairs. One of those pairs contains the sex chromosomes. If you have XX chromosomes, so one chromosome is X, the other is also X, that means you are female. If you have one X and one Y, you are male, as shown here. Female sex cells only produce X chromosomes, whereas male sex cells produce both X and Y. So it's your male sex cells which determine your gender. And as you can see here, the X chromosome is much larger than the Y chromosome. Now, genetic terms which you need to know if you are higher tier students, not so much if you're foundation. Observable characteristic is called the phenotype. So you have blue eyes, your phenotype is blue eyes. Genetic makeup of the characteristic is called the genotype. So if you have blue eyes, your genetic makeup will be little b, little b. That's the genotype, but I'll go through that more later. If you have the same alleles for a gene which codes for a characteristic, it means you are homozygous for that characteristic. If you have different alleles of a gene for a characteristic, it means you are heterozygous for that gene, for that characteristic. An allele is just a form or type of a gene. A dominant allele is always expressed in the phenotype. So if you have a dominant allele, it will always show up in your characteristic. A recessive allele is only expressed if you are homozygous. So if you have two of that recessive allele and there is no dominant allele. Next, genetic crosses example 1. In your exam, you will be required to draw a genetic diagram like this, especially if you are a higher tier student, not so much if you are foundation. So let's go through this. A woman has blue eyes and a man has brown eyes. The two get married and decide to have a baby. What is the chance that the baby will have blue eyes? The allele for blue eyes is recessive. That means it has to be 2 for the person to have blue eyes. And the allele for brown eyes is dominant. That means you only have to have one of the brown eyes, only have to have one of the allele for the brown eyes to have the brown eyes. The man is heterozygous. So what's the genotype of the father? Now we know that the father has brown eyes. And because the brown eyes is dominant, he has to have at least one of that allele. And he is heterozygous. That means it is big B, little b. And to represent dominant and recessive alleles, the uppercase will be dominant and the lowercase will be recessive. And try to use letters which look different, uppercase and lowercase, like the letter B. Now the mother has blue eyes, and because the blue eye allele is recessive, she has to have 2 of them in order to have blue eyes. So that's her genotype. Now what about the offspring? The phenotypes are brown eyes, blue eyes, blue eyes. So here we have big B, little b. Because the brown eye, the big B, is dominant, that means no matter what, if you have that dominant allele, you have brown eyes. The same thing here. But here you have 2 recessive alleles for the blue eyes, so it is blue eyes. So 50% chance of brown eyes and 50% chance of blue eyes. Next. A woman has brown eyes and a man also has brown eyes. The two get married and decide to have a baby. What is the chance that the baby will have brown eyes? Now the allele for blue eyes is recessive, the allele for brown eyes is dominant. The man is heterozygous, the woman is homozygous. So if the man is heterozygous and he has brown eyes, that means big B, little b, because he has to have at least one of the dominant allele for brown eyes. And the woman is homozygous, so same alleles, and she has brown eyes. So that's easy. Brown eye allele, brown eye allele. Let's look at the offspring. So here we have big B, so definitely brown eyes. And here we have big B, definitely brown eyes. And here we have big B, little b. Because the brown eyes is dominant, the recessive allele is not expressed, so it must be brown eyes. Same thing here. That's why it's all brown eyes, 100% chance. Next. Inherited and genetic disorders. This is caused by a faulty genetic material that is passed on to future generations, so it's inherited. It's not infectious, it's not caught, it's inherited from your genes, from your parents. There are 2 examples which you need to know for your exam, and that's polydactyly and cystic fibrosis. Now they're both genetic diseases. polydactyly, you're born with extra fingers or toes, and it's caused by a dominant allele. And that's the main thing you need to know. So remember this, polydactyly, D, dominant, D. Cystic fibrosis is also a genetic disease, and it causes a thick buildup of mucus, so your ability to breathe deteriorates, as shown here. Normal lung, lung with cystic fibrosis. And it's caused by a recessive allele. How do you remember this? You have the S and the S in cystic fibrosis and recessive. So, next. Polydactyly, example 1. A woman has polydactyly and a man does not. The two get married and decide to have a baby. What is the chance the baby will have polydactyly? The woman is homozygous. So let's look at the father first. The father does not have polydactyly, and because polydactyly is dominant, if he has even one of that allele, he will have it. So he does not have it, that means he has none of that allele for polydactyly, so it's all recessive. I have chosen the letter D instead of P, because the letter P looks the same uppercase and lowercase. So that's why you should use letters which look different, uppercase and lowercase. The woman is homozygous, and because she has polydactyly, that means she must have at least one of the dominant polydactyly alleles. Homozygous, that means she has both of them. I have shown the diseased allele in red. So let's look at the offspring. And as you can see, because each of the offspring has that polydactyly allele, and because polydactyly allele is dominant, it will always be expressed. That means 100% chance of all the offspring having polydactyly. So what have we learned here? If one parent has polydactyly and is homozygous, then all the offspring will definitely have polydactyly, because polydactyly is caused by dominant allele. What about if the woman is heterozygous? So same thing, but the woman is heterozygous. That means because she has polydactyly, she must have at least that polydactyly disease allele. But because she is heterozygous, that means the other one is different and recessive. Let's look at the offspring. As we can see, only half of the offspring have the polydactyly allele, and because it's dominant, they will have it no matter what. But the other do not have it at all. They have the recessive allele. They do not have polydactyly allele at all, so they will not have polydactyly. So, 50% chance polydactyly and 50% not. So what have we learned? If one parent has polydactyly and is heterozygous, then only 50% chance that the offspring will have the disease. So, cystic fibrosis. Now, the main difference between cystic fibrosis and polydactyly is cystic fibrosis is caused by a recessive allele. Remember that. So let's look at the example. A man has cystic fibrosis and a woman does not. The two get married and decide to have a baby. What is the chance that the baby will have cystic fibrosis? The woman is homozygous. So let's look at the father first. Because the father has cystic fibrosis, and cystic fibrosis is caused by a recessive allele, he must have both of them in order for him to have cystic fibrosis. The mother is homozygous and does not have cystic fibrosis. That means because she does not have cystic fibrosis, and cystic fibrosis is caused by a recessive allele, and she does not have it, that means, and because she is homozygous, that means it is all big G, big G. Remember, I've used a letter here which looks different, uppercase and lowercase. Let's look at the offspring. So because here we see that all of the offspring will have the diseased cystic fibrosis gene. But because cystic fibrosis is recessive, you have to have both of the alleles, homozygous, in order to have the disease. But we see here, we have a dominant normal allele for each of them, so they will not have the disease. 0% chance cystic fibrosis, because cystic fibrosis is recessive. So if there is a dominant allele, then it will not be expressed. Cystic fibrosis example 2. A man has cystic fibrosis. Okay, it's the same thing, but the woman here is heterozygous. So that means a big G, but she has a diseased cystic fibrosis allele. Let's look at the offspring. And we see here that all of them, as before, have the cystic fibrosis gene. But here, there is a dominant normal allele, and because cystic fibrosis allele is recessive, these two will not have the disease. And because here we have that both of them have both the recessive alleles, then that means they will inherit the cystic fibrosis disease because it's both of the alleles. So, 50% chance cystic fibrosis and 50% chance not. So here's our last example. Now the reason I'm using 3 examples for cystic fibrosis is because, as you will soon see, this example is really important for diseases caused by recessive alleles, like cystic fibrosis. So, a man and woman do not have cystic fibrosis. The two get married and have a baby, but the child has inherited the cystic fibrosis disease. How is this possible? Use a genetic diagram to explain your answer. Now, the only possible way that if two people have a disease that's caused by recessive allele like cystic fibrosis, and yet their offspring has the disease, is because both of them are heterozygous. That means they have that diseased allele, but it's not shown in their phenotype because they have a dominant normal allele. So if we look at the offspring, 75% of them have the dominant normal allele, and so they don't have the disease. But 25% of them, they inherit the diseased allele from the father and the diseased allele from the mother, and so they get both the alleles, and so they are homozygous. Homozygous, remember that word. Because they have both the recessive alleles, and because they have both the recessive alleles, they have the disease. So 25% chance of cystic fibrosis. And the thing here is that the disease has skipped a generation. And this is a really important phrase to use in your exam for your answers. So as you see, this is a really important example for diseases that are caused by recessive alleles. And how can you tell that it's caused by a recessive allele? Well, if you write skipped generation in your exam, you will get the mark. So this has been the Awesome Tutor. Bye.